What's up, everybody? I'm back again with another video. Today, I decided to take an easy video, take an opportunity that I saw. As some of you may know, Matt Walsh released his What is a Woman video on the 1st. If you haven't checked that out, I do highly recommend it. And there was just one section from that movie that really intrigued me. So today, I was going to be reacting to that video. I have really enjoyed watching reaction videos on YouTube. I've always wanted to do them, so I'm going to give it a try right here. Uh, the basic premise of the movie is that Matt Walsh travels to these different places and asks people for their perspective on the question, what is a woman? This particular interview is at the University of Tennessee. It's with Dr. Patrick Grzanka, and he is a professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies. So it seems like this would be a pretty good person to get that answer to what is a woman. So let's jump right into it. He starts off rambling for a bit, so in an effort to keep this video short, I'm going to skip over that to the juicy part. And for fun, I'd like to play a little game where we count how many times this guy, instead of answering the question, he tries to ask Matt Walsh a question.
So are gender and sex two different things, or
Well, I think that they both are and they aren't. I'm comfortable saying that gender and sex are two different constructs, but they're deeply intertwined with each other.
we're talking about gender and sex, and there's a lot of controversies there. If we're talking about a trans woman has all of the male physical characteristics, so would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person is a male?
Well, I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to understand sort of why that's so important. So if someone tells
Just
you,
to sort of understand reality, you know?
This gets pretty fiery right off the bat. The first thing that comes to my mind as I'm watching this guy is the more he talks, the more confused I get. This is a common tactic used by evil people, and the left especially, to make the issue seem very confusing and unclear. They like to muddy the water so that you feel uncomfortable, and hopefully they get into some topic you're not really that familiar with or comfortable with, so you don't really know how to move forward or engage with these ideas. The second thing is I just want you to keep in mind we're really only talking about sex here. Matt Walsh tried to differentiate between sex and gender, so he's talking about males sexually, not what their gender is or what they prefer to be called. We're not talking about any of that. We're just talking about sex, biological sex. And this professor, Patrick, is still very hard pressed to give any kind of straightforward answer. And then also we got the first, I'm going to call them question deflections. We got the first one here. He, instead of answering the question, he says, well, why is this so important?
well, I mean, I think when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. So if a person says that they're a woman or they're a man, then that's them telling you their gender is. I'm not so sure what social um, interactions would have to do with maleness or femaleness that would
Well,
be
I'm not
referred
even
to.
talking about social context. I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of like getting to the truth. Again, in social
why is that?
life,
Why is that uncomfortable?
because that it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me. And if you keep probing, we're gonna stop the interview. I
If I probe about what the truth is,
You keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude. I'm saying to you,
how is the word truth condescending and rude?
why don't you tell me what your truth is? And you're walking on 30 seconds more of thin ice before I get up.
What my truth is? Well, I don't think I really have a truth. I think that there's just the truth,
Yes.
like the reality, and so we should begin by trying to figure out what the reality is.
Yes.
Uh huh.
So this is where the interview really starts to go off the rails a little bit. He says that he's uncomfortable with the language Matt Walsh is using because he used the words getting to the truth. he says not only is he uncomfortable with that language, which, come on, like you're a professor, you're a fully grown man, we have a mission here, we're trying to learn and pursue truth. Like, come on, get over yourself. But he also says that sounds deeply transphobic and also that it's condescending and rude. It's insane. The truth has value. The truth is powerful. It's beautiful. It is knowable. We should all be trying to pursue the truth and be enlightened enough to distinguish between deception and reality. The other thing that was very interesting about this part is he does his second question deflection, and he also threatens to leave the interview. He's, I guess, so uncomfortable, so caught off guard that he does not want to be there. He doesn't want to be exposed. He doesn't want his true ideas or true personality to be publicized. So he literally threatens to leave and says Matt Walsh is walking on thin ice.
And why are you concerned with when someone else tells you that they're a man, or even if they use the word male, why are you concerned with not believing them?
Well, you keep bringing it back to, how do you respond in a social situation? But,
That's what I do. I'm a social scientist.
Well, right, but we're in a university. This is a place of understanding truth, isn't it? Or
Absolutely. We
But the
pursue
truth
truth, and I'm a
So-
social scientist, and that's what I
but
do.
you just said the truth is transphobic.
That you would say that if you're saying the truth is that I get to say you're not a man, show me your genitalia, that's transphobic.
No, I don't want to see anybody's genitalia. I just mean someone can make a statement about themselves that could be untrue. Like, for example, if I were to say that I'm a black man, would you accept that, or would you be skeptical?
Are you black? Are you African American? Are you biracial?
I don't think so.
Yeah, well, you don't look that, and I don't think it doesn't sound like that's a genuine statement of who you are.
Okay, so that's my point. I could make a statement about who I am that's incorrect.
Of course, I think it's well established that human beings can lie, yes.
Or not even lie. I mean, I could just be mistaken.
Yeah.
This interview is just the video that keeps giving. I was very interested when he changed his tune, Dr. Patrick, when Matt Walsh said, "This is a university, isn't this a place where you pursue truth?" And Dr. Patrick goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Of course we pursue truth here." I think he was kind of realizing how totally ridiculous he was sounding and realized that wasn't really a good hill to die on, the truth hill. So he realized, yeah, I should probably at least pretend I care about the truth. In that clip, we had our third question deflection, and I hope it doesn't go unnoticed that Matt Walsh had a real zinger there when Professor Patrick was saying, well, if what you're saying is you get to say you're not a male, show me your genitalia. Matt Walsh says, I don't want to see anyone's genitalia. I thought that was hilarious, and on top of that, I'm just really impressed he was quick and witty enough to come up with that on the spot. Matt Walsh continues to try to make his point with this psycho. Uh, he says, what if I was black? And the professor says, well, you don't look that, and I don't think that's a true representation of yourself. It's very ironic he said, you don't look that. Wouldn't that be considered transphobic if Matt Walsh said, I'm a woman, and this professor said, well, you don't look like a woman? Isn't that transphobic? So it's very bizarre that you can say that about someone who identifies as a certain race but not as a certain gender. Matt Walsh does successfully make his point, though. I think he did a great job there. He makes the professor understand that you can make an inaccurate statement about yourself. And the professor says, yes, of course, people can lie. Human beings can lie. And Matt Walsh said, well, actually, you could also just be mistaken. And the professor reluctantly says, yes, okay, you're right. I think anyone watching that should recognize that that was major points for Matt Walsh, this professor. I mean, he doesn't hasn't really earned any points. He's not really making sense. He's just confusing me the more he talks. But that there, I hope that was a moment where he could reflect and maybe have his eyes open a little bit. Yes, I guess people could be mistaken about what they say about themselves.
I guess this all comes back. This all comes down to really one question, especially women, gender, and sexuality studies. So what is a woman?
Why do you ask that question?
I just really like to know.
What do you think the answer to that question is?
Well, I'm asking. That's why I came to a college professor who's this is what you do.
What other kinds of answers have you gotten?
A lot of like this where you're not answering, and I've gotten a lot of that. So
I think it's interesting that you say that some of the people you've interviewed have been reluctant to answer it, and I think that has a lot to do with the questions that preceded it, and the way that you've conducted yourself in the interview.
how have I conducted myself?
How do you think you've conducted yourself?
You you just really don't want to answer the questions, do you?
So finally, we get to the main event. Matt Walsh asks, "What is a woman?" And of course, Professor Patrick uses the same old tactic. He question deflections 3 times here. He says, "Why do you ask that question? What do you think the answer to that question is? What kind of other answers have you gotten?" When Matt Walsh came to this guy who's supposedly an expert on women's studies and he can't even answer the most basic question. And then the professor starts attacking Matt Walsh for conducting himself poorly, when in reality Matt Walsh conducted himself very calmly and rationally and professionally. And when Matt Walsh asks him, "Well, how have I conducted myself?" the professor deflects again for the 4th time in this clip, plus the 3 in the previous clips. That's for 7 total times already, and it's a pretty short clip. And that's because he doesn't have an answer. He doesn't know how Matt Walsh has conducted himself poorly. Matt Walsh did just fine. He doesn't have answers to any of these questions, or at least not straightforward ones, and that's why he keeps relying on this tactic.
I came today very willing and enthusiastic about answering questions about women's and gender sexuality studies, which is
So
the work that I do.
you wanted to answer questions about women's studies, and so shouldn't the first answer you should be able to provide is what exactly is a woman?
Well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
As a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition is?
I do.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're seeking what we would call in my field of work an essentialist definition of gender. I think it sounds like you would like me to give you a set of biological or cultural characteristics that are associated with one gender or the other.
I'm not seeking any type of definition. I'm just seeking a definition.
Yeah, and I gave you one.
The professor says he was enthusiastic to answer questions about women and gender studies until he realized he was actually going to be asked questions about women and gender studies. I really believe that he was enthusiastic about it, and he accepted the interview for a reason. And that's because these ideas are so rarely challenged by anyone, journalists, the media, common folk. They're never questioned in a serious way. So when these people hear, "Oh, I get to talk about women and gender studies in this new movie coming up," they just assume it's going to be all positive coverage. And it was very telling how giddy he was when he finally answers the question. He says, "Well, I have an answer, and it's so simple. Hee 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 hee." And then he says, "A person who identifies as a woman." How far our society has fallen, where a college professor doesn't even apparently understand what a circular definition is. You can't use the word in the definition, then you just create more confusion. When you give a definition for something, you can use other words, but when you use the same word in the definition, you're not getting anywhere. And that's why I actually believe Matt Walsh when he says, I'm not seeking any particular type of answer. I just want an answer. I just want a definition. And that's because no matter what definition you get, you can actually build from there. You can say, okay, this is what a woman is to you. Even if I might not agree with it, let's take this to its logical extent. If this is a woman, then what about this? Or what about that? Or should these kinds of people be able to do this kind of thing? But when you don't give an answer at all, it's very difficult, I would even say impossible, to have any kind of intellectual conversation or debate.
Can you define the word woman without using the word woman?
You know, it's actually kind of like, it's a curious question, but
I do have to give this guy some credit. He seems like he is actually taking the question seriously. He's like, wow, that's a curious question. He seems like he's really pondering it and thinking about it, which is why I think he's just very brainwashed. I don't think he's an evil person trying to lie and deceive people. I think that is what he's doing. Maybe it's subconsciously, but I that question there does make me think that he genuinely believes in what he's doing, even if he has to kind of cover up or avoid the truth sometimes. This guy's such an interesting case because I don't know what's going on in his head, but it seems like some kind of sirens are going off in his brain that tell him, don't go there. The truth will incriminate you and your position and your ideas. Stay far away from the truth. And so instead of being willing to talk about the truth, he's constantly trying to figure out the angle that Matt Walsh is coming from. At certain parts of this interview, you even see his eyes darting around. And in the pre movie show, one of the guys that helped produce the movie said that some of the interviewees were doing that. They were looking around, trying to get a read of the room, trying to understand what was happening to them. And I think this is just evidence that this position really doesn't add up. When you have to formulate your answer based on the people around you, you have to figure out what angle they're coming from so you can use a different lie. These positions, they don't make sense. You have to constantly change what you mean and change the word definitions of words and change your argument based on which angle you think the other person is coming from. The truth is very simple. He's incapable of talking about the truth. In summary, this guy is way too overly sensitive, and you see this a lot in today's world of politics and religion. People are not used to having their ideas questioned and analyzed and challenged, and I wish we had more of that because I think that's good for a healthy society. I think we should push each other, we should debate things, we should talk about important issues, especially the ones that affect us. This issue does affect a lot of people, and unfortunately, truth and intellectualism are under attack. He was actually able to say that the truth hurt his feelings. This is a college professor that teaches young adults in a school system who is has his feelings hurt when the word truth is used. I think we've seen that Dr. Patrick does not bring light or clarity to anything that he talks about. He constantly needed to make assumptions about Matt Walsh. You saw him do that, I think, two or three times. He assumed certain things about Matt Walsh, and it was really just anti-intellectual what I watched him spout. And it makes me feel bad for the young people nowadays who are in school, growing up, learning how to think, because the stuff that's being pushed and taught is not the truth. It is not debated. It is an ideology. And it's very sad because we need more people who can think. We need more people who can problem solve. We need more people who can be calm and rational even when their ideas are being challenged. And I'd like to just take it back to the first question Dr. Patrick asked Matt Walsh, which is, why are you asking the question?
I care about the truth. I care about children. I care about the women who are having their opportunities stolen from them.